Okay. Namaste. Welcome to Kona Dialogues. Kona, or Coalition of Hindus of North America, is a Hindu grassroots advocacy organization. And we stand with the Hindus in North America, which is Canada and the United States, on civil and human rights of our community. So today we are here as two leaders. I am Sudha Jagannathan. My host here is Richa Gautam. We are both Kona leaders, and we have worked together on many things that have come our way that tries to abuse us and smear us versus our reputation as upstanding citizens in the United States. So today we are going to talk about the SB403 caste discrimination bill that has been introduced in the California Senate by Senator Aisha Wahab, using a foundation of what I call atrocity literature. We want to debunk that atrocity literature with facts about using the upstanding Carnegie endowment that published a survey of Indian Americans in 2021, debunked the atrocity literature from a hate group called Equality Labs. And so we ourselves, Hindus, have not done a good job of promoting Carnegie's data, because Carnegie's job is just to do research. It is a job of people like us who should have taken that information to our community leaders and let them know who we are and why that study is important for the leaders in the political spectrum, chambers of commerce, our business leaders, our temples, everybody to understand the realities of our society in America. We did not do that. So that is why we are sitting ducks for abuse. So Richa Gautam is also a Kona leader, and she has done a lot of work as a data analyst with the Carnegie team. And so she is here to talk about the findings of the 2021 survey. And once we go through that, we will then start a conversation again, she leading it, about caste.org. And what is the story behind the Cisco case, which is talked about and becomes a foundation for all of this caste bomb attacks. Okay, with that, Richa, thank you for joining. Let me tell you guys, she's calling in from India, and it shows just her passion for fighting for our causes. So thank you, Richa, and take it away. Let's start with the 2021 Carnegie, okay?
Thank you so much, Sudhaji. Thank you for the kind introduction. And, you know, I have been so deeply associated with the caste fight. I actually started 6 years ago. I was introduced into an interfaith dialogue with what turned out to be a Sikh forum, largely, understanding Sikhism. And in that, there were lots of very good Sikhs, but also lots of Khalistanis. And I got my feet wet in the caste debate, caste understanding of what is Brahminical patriarchy according to our atrocity literature, etc. With that sort of fight, and I can give another talk on that later someday, because that was a very, very interesting forum. But after that, when the Equality Labs report became public, I did a rebuttal on that. And it was obviously an unscientific survey, self-acknowledged. Equality Labs has also personally acknowledged, you know, Tenmudi Sundarajan has acknowledged that it is an unscientific survey, online, even internationally, anybody could answer it. So to project that and create policy using that sort of inane collection of information, specifically information that was collected 7 years ago in 2016, when Equality Labs was formed, that is when the survey data was collected. And then they sat on it for 2 years and released the report in 2018. And after that, it has been mayhem. You know, we actually earlier laughed it up, and, you know, we were like, oh my God, this is so silly. But when it started to become policy, when the Cisco case came about, we became a little bit more serious. Brandeis University was the first one to set up a resolution adding caste as a category to its discrimination policy. So, but that's the background of it. I also looked at court documents of caste, of Cisco caste discrimination case, and it has been so eye-opening to see the kind of fabricated evidence that is part of and the groundwork of Cisco caste discrimination case. If you go to castgate.org, that is a website that I have worked on with a bunch of other analysts. And basically, we have found huge, egregious corruption, prosecutorial abuse in this whole process. And it is something to look at. If you are not able to spend a lot of time, just look at pages 11, 12, 13 of the motions for sanctions. That is part of the cascade.org, or just spend some time reading out. So that said, I've also, like Sudhaji said, looked at and worked with during the clubhouse sessions with some of the analysts of the Carnegie Endowment Survey, the Pew Research Survey, and we have found those two reports actually were very, very robust in terms of methodology. They use random stratified sampling, which is the standard sampling for projectable data. And what they found, Pew Research was a survey conducted in India, and Carnegie Endowment, which is of great interest to us today, is the one that was conducted understanding attitudes and social behaviors of Indian Americans. Okay, so with that background, Sudhaji, may I just go into the details of Carnegie Endowment, or yes, right, specifically the caste bit, right? So if you see Carnegie Endowment Survey, because I wanted to cover a lot of points, I don't have slides today, but please follow me on Twitter. I will post my Twitter. I do a lot of work on this issue on Twitter, trying to raise awareness on the kind of exigencies that are part of this whole caste dialogue in the United States. Carnegie Endowment Survey will tell you that, first of all, caste identity is so diluted that less than half of the Hindu Americans actually even agreed that they had, first of all, less than half answered it. Out of those, less than half of those, 46% of them said that, yes, they do have a caste identity, general, SC, ST, or OBC, which are actually Indian categories. In India, you have these categories, right? And you basically find that those kind of categories for Indian Americans who have studied in India, worked in India, they would know about it because we use those identifications to fill our forms in schools and at corporate levels, So it's okay to have that sort of an identity. Caste identity is not caste discrimination. Secondly, when you go down deeper into the kinds of discrimination they have experienced, most Indian Americans said that they have experienced, over 50% have said that they do experience discrimination. But what are the reasons? Mostly it was race, it was color of skin, right? Those were the kinds of, largely, that was the biggest issue that they faced, or national origin. But when it came to caste, the data was so insignificant. They were not able to get enough sample and projectable information. So even though it says like less than 5% or so, that data they clearly said at the bottom, which any statistician would say, that the data was so statistically insignificant that, the data was sample size was so low that this is statistically non-projectable data. So basically, caste discrimination, in short, is not a problem in the United States, according to Carnegie Endowment. They also debunked the survey, just as I did and other survey analysts did, calling it, non-projectable data and data that cannot be taken seriously, basically. So in their footnote 29, they clearly mentioned that the snowball sampling that was used by Equality Labs surely is not the right methodology for this data, and to consider that alarming fact that this data is being touted as the data which is used at Harvard. It is the data that is used in policy making, is an alarming fact, and shows the kind of corruption that we see in the Cisco case is also the truth for the Equality Lab survey. They are using it to further a political agenda. So that is a very, very important fact to note, why we need to fight this. I have received calls from people saying, why are you fighting it? My friends and sometimes, others. But we are fighting it because this is inaccuracy. It is not, it is, and it will pigeonhole us into a sort of an identity, which is not really, it's a diluted identity. We don't have that identity. So with that said, I think I have completed some parts of what Sudhaji said. I would talk about. What I also want to say is that not only is this survey not good for using for legislation, as they're trying to do, the Equality Lab survey has been used by CRD, or the Civil Rights Department that files Cisco case. They used it in their reports, okay, and they in the judicial court documents, in their testimonials, they have used that Equality Lab survey. They also used the anonymous anecdotal evidence from 30 Dalit women that are in the tech industry and who have claimed that they are afraid of being outed. So they've stayed anonymous and they have faced discrimination day in and day out and caste slurs. So when Judge Drew Takaichi heard of these two in the court, he made them inadmissible. So both these documents, the Equality Lab survey, as well as the testimonies of these 30 Dalit women, were not considered admissible in the court. What does that mean? That means that the judiciary does not consider this as legit information to create law. And yet the legislators like the senators are using, the guide from Equality Labs as for creating this SB403. Talking about SB403, I can say one thing, that in Seattle, though they used the language straight out of Equality Labs, I see that the language here is a little bit more sophisticated, but it does still target Hindus for being, for simple things like, say, endogamy. Now, I think the big questions, if you're meeting your senators, is, do you consider endogamy an offense? Is endogamy the idea that we would like to marry within our own, say, community or within our own certain jati or, systems, whatever it is, how can that be considered criminal? So that is, are you going to consider vegetarianism criminal? What are you going to define as criminal in this whole process? So that is the way they've defined it. Sudhaji, do you have that information? I'm trying to pull it up.
I have a couple of slides, Richa, if I may show them. It reinforces exactly what you said. So if you don't mind, can I share a couple of slides?
Please, yeah, thank you so much.
Let me do that. Hold on. Yeah.
And if there are questions,
post your questions on the Q&A. We also have Suresh Krishnamurthy, who's on the board of directors. He will speak in a few minutes about the legal aspects of this and why this, this bill has a problem. So when we talk to lawmakers, we always bring up social justice based on false data. And let me go full screen on this so you guys can see it. So this is actually, okay, so what you see here is exactly what Richa talked about, the 2021 Carnegie Survey, which in footnote number 29 called out that the problems with the law. I don't want to go into, problems with equality lab study. Richa already spoke to it, that it has no basis on reality, that it is a fake. Just any ordinary citizen can throw out a survey and say, hey, I found ABC. That's what it is. And that cannot be admissible or made to be a foundation of policy, which is what's happening in California, happened in Seattle. Everybody touts equality labs. Nobody challenges them. That is a problem, right? And in addition to what she said about the judge, we have the ruling. We can easily send it to you, where the judge threw out and made it inadmissible. That is a big point we need to bring up with every lawmaker. Just to highlight what Richa said here, this was the finding of the Carnegie survey, where a quarter of the Hindus who responded said, no idea what you're talking about. Caste? What exactly is it? Second, third generation, or even, I'd have to say, I've lived in US for 40 years, lived in India. Caste was not a reality for me. I'm not saying it's not, it's the same for everyone else. It was not, okay? So quarter of the people who responded said, I have no idea. And only 20% of the respondents said, well, it has some relationships to what I do in my social networks, right? And so what Kona has done is taken this to compare it to how does the general public behave? What is their behavior? So 80% of Protestants find their social networks among Protestants. 82% of Black Protestants, mingle with their community. So 20% of the respondents to the Carnegie survey say, yeah, we meet with people who talk like us, the same language, we have same food habits, everything. So now that is a crime. So, and this was done by the Survey Center of American Life. These are the things we bring up to the lawmakers, and we should all know this. These are the facts of life of Americans in, Hindus in America, and be able. Anyway, those are the 3 slides. I'm going to stop sharing. I just wanted to bring it up. And Richard, do you want to conclude before we go to
what has happened is, I don't know, my video is off for some reason. I can't, yeah.
Oh, Richa needs to be made co-host again, Kona office. So while there she is now. Richa, can I have Suresh Krishnamurthy join for maybe 3 minutes before we go to caste.org? Or do you have a few more things to close on Carnegie?
No, so I was just, I think that's okay. Yeah, we can go later into I had 2 more points. Of course, I wanted to talk about how they have defined Hinduism. And so that, I think, has been done by Equality Labs. So I had 3 main points. One was, of course, the fact that Cisco case is, and Sureshji, you had some points as well on the same issue, or I wanted to know, like, where should we segue? My point was about Hinduism next, which I wanted to cover, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to amplify a couple of things that Richa has been pointing out so far about the caste survey that was conducted by Equality Labs. Before we go further, one of the things that the reason why so many people are opposed to Equality Lab, not just the methodology, but there are a few things that stand out about that survey which make it very, very poor as a data source. One is they surveyed 1,500 people, and these 1,500 people were very carefully chosen to be Dalit activists. They actually targeted people who are Dalit. They actually targeted people by going after, by publicizing the survey in groups that had a particularly significant proportion of Dalits and a significant proportion of Dalit activists. So that is the first thing. And then when they got the response back, they knocked out about 20% of the responses as quote unquote invalid because they did not conform to what they were expecting. So imagine doing a survey and then knocking off 25% of the responses right off the bat. saying, oh, they were either deliberately misleading or they did not identify something that we wanted them to identify and so on. So that was the second part of it. Then the third question is, okay, now you've got a survey where you have identified people who are, active in that issue. And then you're asking them all these very loaded questions. And here is a weird thing. Of the people who were targeted to be Dalits, they keep saying, oh, 25% of them reported, caste-based discrimination. I'm more interested in the opposite. 75% of the Dalits who were surveyed basically came back and said, we didn't see any discrimination. Okay, remember that. 3/4 of the Dalits in the United States who are supposedly being discriminated every single day by these upper caste Hindus, diaspora Hindus, came back and said, no, we haven't seen any discrimination. So that's the other thing to remember. The third thing about it is even their own survey, that is Equality Labs' own survey, says on page 39 on that report, they say, this survey has not been tested for statistical significance. They caution that this is not a statistically valid response in their own report. And here we are taking that survey and publishing it and making it the basis for all kinds of laws around the country. So there are multiple problems with the survey. And then if you get into the survey questions, it gets even more complicated. But here is the power of messaging. The power of messaging is they've taken something that is extraordinarily flawed. They've put it out there. And then over a period of 3 years, they've constantly kept saying the survey says this, survey says this, survey says this. To the point where the survey has become the gold standard for understanding caste in America, which is very unfortunate because by the time we got around to looking closely at the survey, saying, what are they talking about? We've never seen anything like this. What are these guys talking about? It was too late because they've done their work very carefully. They have gone to all the lawmakers that they needed to go to. They've put the survey out there and said, this is the definitive survey of caste in America. Now we are in the position of trying to discredit it. And that's always a hard task. You can never discredit something that is already out there in the narrative. So one of the big lessons for us is we as a community need to step up and challenge some of these notions right off the bat. So that's one of the primary reasons why we are going after SB403. Because if we say, well, what is a big deal? Let California do its own thing. Before you know it, every other city will be doing it. And then it'll be impossible to change the narrative. So when we see a narrative that is wrong, we immediately jump on it to say, no, this narrative is incorrect. We have to fix this. We can't let this go. And that's why we are fighting so hard.
Yes, thank you, Sureshji. And to the point, I mean, very many points here. To the point that, they have said that 1/4 of the Dalits felt discriminated. Like Sureshji said, 75% seem to have said that they don't feel discriminated, even though it is within their own cohorts, right? These are active Dalit, Ambedkarite people, who are aware of what's going on, So the other point I want to make is if there are 25% people who are feeling, that there are assaults, there are slurs, why are there are no police cases? It is such a safe place in America to go register your police complaint. There is no such complaint. And like I said, the Cisco case is so full of holes and there's egregious, information which you can check out at castgate.org, where we have all the public court documents uploaded as well. It's a very informative site and you can check it out. Thirdly, there is absolutely no mention of the kind of affirmative action that is going on in India, where we have reservations and quota systems to uplift the so-called, the Dalits or the Adivasis, or, so SC, ST, OBC. So that has shown results. You will see that in the prime minister, the president are all from communities that have earlier been classified as depressed classes. So that said, it is clear, it should be clear to all of us that there is an agenda to target Indian Americans, and in that, specifically in California, as you can see, we are a large number of us, and we are upholding pretty much the Silicon Valley, the ecosystem there, right? So it is also, I feel, in some ways targeting of America, because it is a socialist work culture. Shama Sawant in Seattle has clearly told us that she's a socialist. The entire ecosystem of the progressive left is a socialist, unionized mechanism to bring larger government interference into whether it's corporate or into public life. So that said, I think I want to go into the last point that I had, which is about how they keep defining Hinduism, right? Because Equality Labs has clearly defined us as a rigid Hindus, and the Hindu system has a rigid social hierarchy which perpetrates caste. I have it. So it defines caste as a strict Hindu social and religious hierarchy. I'm quoting this from their report, which is also part of their court testimonies for Cisco case. And they say that India's caste system defines a person's status based on their religious ancestry, ethnicity, and race, and even color. And it remains so until death. So this is the kind of classification and definition of Hinduism that they are perpetrating. And SB403 has been very clever in not using Equality Labs definitions, because earlier we pushed back so hard, whether it was in the Santa Clara Human Rights Commission or in this other resolutions. And I think that has made them smarter. They have used a definition which I feel is closer to the Harvard Law Review paper. There was a Harvard Law Review paper that was published a couple of years ago by Guha Krishnamurthy and Charanya Krishnaswamy. And in that, they have defined caste as a hereditary transmission with endogamy and, a religious and social practice. So I think they've used some of that terminology in the SB 403. That's what I noticed. And if you see that paper, what you will realize is that the paper does admit that caste at present can be addressed under Title VII as discrimination based on race, religion, or national origin. So basically what you're seeing is, firstly, they're defining Hinduism through Equality Labs, which we had resisted. And that is something which is very, very unconstitutional, because nobody has the right to define Hinduism. And that is something I also stated too when we had some meetings with senators. And this is something you can use as a very important point, that you feel targeted as a Hindu, and it's unconstitutional to define a religion. It's a violation of our First Amendment and equal rights protection. So that is a very important point that any layperson can take, that even as Hindus, we don't define our religion in any strict terms. We have our own it's our oldest religion. It's a very wide range of systems of prayer within Hinduism. So how can they come up and define what we are? So that, I think, is a very big point to argue when you go meet your senators or even congressmen. And I think I will stop there. I'm sure there'll be questions.
Yeah, thank you, Richa. Suresh, do you want to take on that? Well, she made a very big important point about state defining religion, and you have done quite a bit of discussions about that, right?
Yeah. So in the United States, so there are a couple of questions. I want to combine that with a couple of questions that have been asked by people. One question was, can we not sue to prevent the use of that caste-based caste in the United States survey, considering that it is bad data? Well, first of all, laws in the United States, while anybody can sue anybody, the rate of success of a lawsuit of this nature is extremely, extremely small. It's very difficult to win these kinds of lawsuits in the United States. So I want to be very clear about that. It's not that we don't, we are too chicken to sue or anything like that, but we're also very practical in figuring out what we can and what we cannot sue about. There is nothing that prevents a legislature from passing a law based on bad data. Let me repeat that so everybody understands it very clearly. You cannot stop a legislature from passing a law based on really bad data, or even fake data for that matter. Okay. The reason for that is the courts in the United States will always say, we don't interfere with the legislature's decisions because there is always a remedy. The remedy is readily available. The people can vote them out and they can change the law. Okay. Therefore, the courts almost never interfere with legislative decision, which is why it's really, really difficult to go after the Seattle City Council to say, oh, they passed a law based on the words of a Marxist. Well, Marxists have a right to pass laws. It's that simple, right? We may not like it, but that's how it works. Similarly, we cannot sue the state of California from passing SB403 on the grounds that it is, bad law, or it targets Hindus, or it does this or does that. Because for all of that, the court will answer, if you don't like it, vote them out and have someone else take that place. So the only way we can actually challenge laws that are being enacted, and even they have a relatively small rate of success, is on constitutional grounds. A legislature is not allowed to pass a law that is unconstitutional, that violates a certain provision of the Constitution, which means it has to be argued and upheld by a constitutional judge, which means either the district court or the Supreme Court, right? It's got to be either the US District Court or the Supreme Court, which is the final authority on what is constitutional, what is not. So having said that table, the only way we can legally oppose a SB403 is by pointing out how it violates the Constitution. And that is just an argument we are making. We're making a case. We're putting up a theory. They can either agree or disagree. They can overlook it. We shared a lot of these concerns with the Seattle City Council, and they turned around, they completely ignored it and passed the law anyway. Okay. So why do we feel that this is unconstitutional? Okay. So I'm going to give a kind of a high level without getting into the legal murkiness. There are three basic criteria under which we think this is unconstitutional. One is the criteria of equal protection, where the Constitution says everybody should be treated equally when it comes to a matter of, whether you're arresting somebody or whether you're not arresting somebody. In anything to do with the law must view all the people in the country as equals, which means it should apply equally to everybody. So think of, say, racial discrimination. Everybody has a race, period, right? Whether you are white, black, Hispanic, this, that, or the other thing, it doesn't matter. You have a race. You can't say I'm raceless, right? Everybody has a race. So anybody can sue anybody for racial discrimination. And then when the courts look at it, they'll look at it and go, okay, this person is this race, that one is that race. Is it reasonable? Was there a pattern? And all that kind of stuff. Similarly, even sexual orientation. When you bring a case for sexual orientation, even if it is self-identified, right? If you say, hey, you know what? I am asexual. I have no sexual orientation at all. That in itself is considered a sexual orientation. Not being sexually oriented is also considered sexual orientation, right? So in all the other conditions, it is everybody is subject to the law, right? With the case of caste, they have made it very clear that caste is found only in certain geographic regions, from Japan to Nigeria to wherever, right? By definition, they are essentially saying people who immigrated from Europe are not subject to caste because the caste system was never found in Europe. People who were born in the United States are not subject to caste, but if you happen to come from a heritage that used to be in India, then you're subject to caste. Okay, this is very unequal because if you're born in the United States, you're born in the United States. It shouldn't matter what your heritage is, right? If you're saying an Italian immigrant is not subject to caste, but an Indian immigrant is, then the law is no longer neutral. It's not equal protection. So that is one big criteria. The second criteria which we talk about, which we complain about a lot, is what we call a vagueness criteria, right? If a law is impossibly vague, then it cannot be constitutional, right? So if somebody is speeding, there has to be a standard that says you were speeding because the speed limit was 65 and you were driving 70. It's a very objective criteria. It can be shown as to either true or not true, right? Simple as that. But if you say, if, for example, the law said you are speeding because the wind was blowing, that is extraordinarily vague. Okay, you cannot justify somebody's speeding ticket by saying it was windy, or not justify somebody's speeding ticket by saying it's not windy. Caste is that same criteria, because it's impossible to say what somebody's caste is. There is no authority in the United States. There is no paperwork. There is nothing here in the US that says officially that you are or not this caste. So if somebody says, I am XYZ caste, and the other person is ABC caste, and the ABC discriminated against XYZ, the natural question will be, well, first of all, is ABC his real caste? And secondly, why does ABC discriminate against XYZ? What is your theory? And so on. What we found, and this is not a theoretical exercise, this is very real, because in the Cisco case, Sundar Iyer, just because of his last name, was deemed to be upper caste, even though he himself has said, I don't have any caste, I don't believe in the caste system, I'm not even religious. And yet he was tagged as a Brahmin, upper caste, and they had a whole lawsuit going. So we would argue right away that this is simply unconstitutional. You can't do this, right? The third criteria on which we claim unconstitutionality is, in the US, governments are not allowed to prescribe or legally comment upon a religious practice unless they can show an extraordinarily important state interest. So in theory, for example, if some magical religion showed up and said, in our religion, we have the right to kill people, okay? And they started killing people because of that. Then the government can say that is not something that we would condone, we would tolerate. But what we are seeing with the caste system is the California state is saying that the caste system is part of Hinduism. It cannot do that. It cannot say what is and what isn't unless the religion itself says that, right? In some senses, the nature of Hinduism protects us from this kind of a claim. Because if you take Christianity, if you take Islam, if you take Judaism, if you take any of the other religions where they have a quote unquote religious head, so what the Pope says is legitimately part of Christianity, right? You can always make that argument. Or in Islam, if there is a fatwa that is handed down from an imam, you can say that is part of Islam. If it is found in the Quran, it's part of Islam, and so on and so forth. But with Hinduism, there is nothing that says automatically that everybody has a caste. And yet here we have the state saying Hinduism, somehow everybody has a caste. Well, the state can't do that. They don't get to prescribe what the religion is or isn't. And that is one of our other major objections. So we have raised these and then a few more. We think we have a very strong case to make. We believe that this is very real, but I also want to be very practical about it. There is absolutely nothing that prevents a legislature from passing any bill as long as they follow the rules. That is why in the books we have lots of bad laws. And that is also why in the books we have lots of laws that we know are bad, that we can't change them. Okay, I mean, I'll give you a simple example. In Virginia, the age to get married, the legal age to get married is 14. There was recently a move to raise that to 18. They couldn't do it. It failed, right? So you have the situation where you can have bad laws on the books. It may not get enforced, and it might, when it actually happens, it may get challenged, that it may fail, but it can be on the books. So I just want us to be very practical and realistic in our understanding of how laws are made in our country and how we can or how we cannot fight these laws. These are important distinctions to make. These are important things for us to remember. And these are important things for us to remember when we talk to senators or when we talk to lawmakers, because they're aware of this. So we should let them know that we are also aware of this. Yes, we get it. We get that legislatures are allowed to pass bad laws. What we are trying to point out to you is you are passing a bad law. You are passing a law that is probably going to get challenged on constitutional grounds. It won't work. You are passing a law that is fundamentally unfair, and here is how it is, and we're going to hold you to that. So if you vote for it, we are going to remember it next time you run for election. These are the remedies that we actually have, and that's the reason why the courts won't get involved.
Right. I want to add to that a couple of points. So I think to summarize what you said, Sureshji, I think the 2 points that to define Hinduism, the state has no right, and that is unconstitutional. And then to assign a religion to a person is unconstitutional, right? So both of these things are happening here, like in Sundar Iyer's case, who proclaimed himself as an atheist. And in that case, he should not have been assigned even Brahmin or, any sort of labels like that, but he was tagged as a Brahmin, So those 2 points, defining a religion and defining a person's, faith, are both unconstitutional. Thirdly, I wanted to point out that, there was a law in California that was passed, I think, about women, equal number of women being part of the board of companies, right? And this was challenged in, I think, a Los Angeles court. And then the judge ruled that, yes, it is unconstitutional to require that sort of a criteria for a board of a company. So basically, they were able to throw that law out. I think a similar law was tried for LGBTQ, to have, a few number of LGBTQ on the board, and that was passed, that was thrown out. So basically, if at all this comes through, we can run, it will have to run its due course eventually, I guess. But this has to be challenged tooth and nail, because this is trying to define us and, defame us both.
Yeah. So Richard, you want to go into the caste? I'm sorry, CasteGate after Suresh finishes.
Yeah, let me just make one point to make sure that people get what Richard was saying. What Richard is pointing out is very important. It is also equally important for us to have these talking points. The reservation system in India would be blatantly unconstitutional in the United States. You cannot, the Supreme Court has ruled again and again and again in every case that has brought up affirmative action, that affirmative action cannot become a quota. You cannot have reservation. That's illegal in the United States. So if somebody pushes and says, oh, wait a minute, how come you have reservations in India? Well, that's because the Indian Constitution allows it and the US Constitution doesn't. Okay, that's one reason. The other reason is we have to learn to challenge and say that the affirmative action program, I mean, people like Equality Lab, they're very careful and they're very crafty in how they do this. And they're very smart about how they do this. They will tell you that Dalits benefited from an affirmative action program in India. Well, what they're trying to do is to normalize that into the context of the United States, when in reality, the affirmative action program in India is actually a reservation program, a quota system that is approved by the Indian Constitution, which is illegal in the United States. We have to remember that. And one more point about endogamy, and I'll let Richard talk about caste. There's a startling statistic. About 70 years ago, in a very famous Supreme Court case, Virginia versus Loving, the Supreme Court ruled that states cannot ban intercaste marriages, which is what they were doing in the past. So a black man marrying a white woman or vice versa was illegal. Virginia versus Loving came in and said, no, you can't make it illegal. The arguments posed there were very similar to what is being argued today, which is, oh, it promotes endogamy, it is all groupism, this, that, and the other thing. Well, here is an interesting statistic. 70 years after Virginia versus Loving, right, in 2021, the percentage of endogamous marriage within a race, that is Hispanics marrying Hispanics, whites marrying whites, blacks marrying blacks, is over 90%. 9 out of 10 marriages are still within the race, within the community, within the group. It's a natural human emotion to want to marry somebody like yourself. Now, sometimes that crosses race boundaries, sometimes it doesn't, but at the end of the day, we make choices like that. And we have to respect the fact that, society has spoken loud and clear. So let me turn it over to Richard. You talk about CasteGate.
Yes.
Yeah, Richard, we have 10 minutes and we have a lot of questions. So
okay.
I would like you to address CasteGate.
Yeah. Okay. I had, there was an old story, like I remember my grandma telling me about how a rishi once turned a mouse into a beautiful woman. And then when she grew up and she had to get married, he tried to get her married to a prince. And then, she's, a mountain, a river, but in the end, a lion, so they went through a lot of things. And then eventually she said, I like that mouse. So she was a mouse. She was turned into a woman by the rishi using his magical powers. And then eventually she wanted to go marry a mouse. So I think I was just trying to illustrate in the funny story, just what Sureshji just said, that endogamy is not a crime, first of all, So just a little, light comment there. But CasteGate is nothing light. It has been a painful affair for me to read and to understand how many violations of truth, of the, how many corrupt, ways there were during this whole ordeal of the Cisco case. And I was reading the court documents pretty much from the day one. I've been following this case when June 30th, 2020, when it was filed. It was around the time when I had just about completed the Equality Lab survey analysis, and Brandeis had come out with the resolution. So I could sense that there is something fishy about this, and I kept following this case. And what I have I've built a team of analysts who have worked on this. And we have found like really egregious corruptions. First of all, Sundar Iyer, who is an IIT Bombay, graduate, he hired John Doe, who's claimed to be a self-identifying Dalit. And John Doe has also claimed that Sundar Iyer knew his caste as a Dalit, who had come into IIT as on a reservation quota. So, but Sundar Iyer, first of all, gave him a job. He mentored him, gave him leadership positions. These were all part of his, testimony and, depositions in court. And those documents are uploaded on CasteGate. Thirdly, Sundar Iyer also gave him millions of dollars in, equity and as, bonuses. And yet, John Doe filed a harassment complaint within the HR at Cisco, as well as he filed a harassment, a case against him, eventually, as discriminating him because of a few $1,000s of salary not being given to him. Lower raise given to him, whereas he got millions in compensation. So there was something fishy from the point, sort of starting point from the get-go. And so those are like some of the very big violations. Of course, we saw that unconstitutionally, Sundar was assigned a Brahmin. And then as soon as the case came out, you must have seen 20 to 30 stories within a span of 6 weeks coming out all over this, about how Hindus are casteist, how caste discrimination is rampant among Hindus. And look at Cisco, it's Exhibit A. So today, I think Cisco case is an Exhibit A of how caste, is actually, it is a dubious case, and we should follow it and see, what are the red flags there, and how, if you follow CasteGate, you will, and, we'll have lots more articles and coming up on that. And you will find that, this case has no merit. Cisco itself has stated that, that this is a meritless case in their in their demurrer. Also, recently, the two boys, Sundar Iyer and Ramana Kumpela, together, they filed a motion for sanctions. Basically, it listed out a lot of the anomalies of the case and the reason where they feel that this is, it violates their constitutional rights and it has fabricated evidence. So there are chances that, we may see good news here, basically, given that the motion for sanctions lists out very strongly all of these points. So, we should wait and watch how things go on this. And these are just some of the points that we can use, eventually when we go to our senators to show this website. Please share it, because it has all evidence. It has all the core documents in there, so you can actually pick up the motion for sanctions and the pages, 10 to 15 or so. You can take a look at that. And specifically 14 and 15 to talk about all of the egregious anomalies in this case, right? I think I'll let the questions
so,
go.
Richa, let's take some questions. Let's take some questions for you and Suresh. I think there is a big list of questions.
Can I also say one more thing, one last thing which I forgot to say about, not about CasteGate, but about the fact how they define Hinduism. So I just want to say that the three terms that are being thrown at us, whether in Toronto, whether in Seattle or in California, are caste, Dalit, and Adivasi. All these three terms were part of the British colonial imposition. They are not part of Hindu scriptures. This is a very important thing. And it was part of the colonization process, and Dalit word was invented around the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was, introduced along with Adivasi, the term also. So, if you think of the kind of rich country with high GDP that India was, what you will find is that always, if you've studied economics, a great middle class, a large middle class usually drives a large GDP, which is what we see in America right now. Everybody is rich. Even a plumber will have, a good house and a car, or so what's considered a blue collar job. But what I'm trying to say here is people who are impoverished by the extraction economy and high taxation of the British, who took $45 trillion, as you know, from India, as stated by Shashi Tharoor in his book. Then in that case, those people eventually became the impoverished people, the Dalits. And it's a very large conversation, but just so that we don't hold that guilt of, the Dalits are 2,500-year-old Pancham Varna, as they are calling it. It is a falsehood that is being perpetrated time and time again on us. And you have to challenge it. We have to learn these facts. But Sudhaji, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to pick some questions and either Suresh or Richa, you can answer. So I'm seeing questions about how do we convince our friends? Do you want to address that? That SB403 is, is harmful for us.
Suresh, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think one way to look at that is I wrote an article on American Kahani explaining exactly why HB403 is a threat to us. The problem with SB403 is that it creates a presumption of guilt. We have to remember that it is creating a presumption of guilt. If you are quote unquote upper caste or Savarna, as they call it, then it is up to you to prove that you did not discriminate based on caste. And we see that because speaker after speaker testifying at these hearings stands up and says, oh, I am an upper caste privileged Brahmin, or I'm an upper caste privileged this, that, or the other thing, and I support this legislation. Well, if you are upper caste privileged, well, you don't have to be upper caste and privileged. You can stop being upper caste and privileged. You can simply say, I'm not, right? And yet, because they are being forced to stand up and quote unquote defend themselves, people who are not discriminating at all, who couldn't care less about caste, by the very virtue of someone else telling them that you're upper caste, you are now forced to defend yourself by saying, but I'm not upper caste. Now, Sundar Iyer had the foresight or luck or whatever to have written 20 years ago when he was at Stanford that he doesn't believe in all of this. But what if you haven't written such an article, but you still don't believe in all of this, right? I mean, I don't believe in killing, but I don't write articles saying I don't believe in killing. I can't provide an evidence to say, oh, you're not a natural killer. Well, how am I supposed to prove that? So the way to convince your friends is to ask them the question. Just ask them to think about tomorrow. If somebody said, as a manager, if somebody walked up to you and said, you discriminated against me because you're upper caste and I am not, how would you defend yourself? What would be your proof? What proof can you show that you are not a discriminator? If you can't answer that question reasonably, that a jury would buy it, well, then you are threatened by this law, because this law says somebody can tell you you are upper caste and therefore you're discriminating against me, and it is up to you to prove that you're not upper caste. So that's the question I would ask all my friends. How would you defend yourself? Don't worry about anybody else. Don't think about anything else. How will you defend yourself if somebody says you're upper caste because you're upper caste? That's it. It's circular.
Very good.
Great.
And please read that article on American Kahani by Suresh Krishnamurthy. We put out a lot of articles. And there's another question by Sandeep Ji. Can you, can you get us on shows? And please get us on TV shows. You know, American media doesn't give us voice. They never publish our stories. You will never see us on in New York Times or NPR. Well, we showed up in NPR in a very tiny segment. If you have connections, pull us in. We want to be talking to Americans about what we are facing. And it's very important that we get a megaphone. We don't have it today. So if you have connections, please do that. And Richard, did you want to say something? Well, I look at another question.
Yeah, thank you. So Daji, so I just wanted to add to Suresh's point, that just 2 points, like you said, you know, CasteGate, just go to CasteGate. What happened to Sundar Iyer could happen to any one of us. And we would not be so lucky. He, by the way, also, instead of John Doe, he promoted another Dalit candidate. That was another, point that I missed out. So think about it. Not only did he help John Doe throughout, but he also promoted another Dalit. So yet he had to face all these, charges and 3 years of, hell. And it's still continuing. The case has not been dismissed or anything like that. It's still. So think about it. If this is an Exhibit A, first of all, that, and second of all, do you really believe that Hinduism is the rigid social hierarchy where the upper caste discriminates against lower caste? In the United States specifically, and show them Carnegie Endowment Survey and show them Equality Labs. And these are the 3 points I have. That do you believe in what Carnegie says, or do you believe in what equality says? And if this is not true, then remember, this is going to come and bite us at some point. Like it's
the other point I would raise, Richa, other point I would raise to every parent here in this group or any WhatsApp groups, you have to teach your kids. They are not privileged by their own whatever. If they are privileged, they are economically privileged because of your contributions, okay, because of your hard work. If they go out there and in public hearings and say, I am caste privileged, I'm upper caste, that's because you've allowed them to be brainwashed because you haven't done your job. I want to say that it applies to me too, okay? The Hindu community has failed our future generations who now stand up on the other side, goes and attends Equality Labs training to come back and attack and destroy our families. So I want to let you all know, you cannot say I'm too busy with my work and just throw kids in Chinmaya Mission or any other Bala Vihar. You have to do more. Teach them about Dharma. We have kids coming home, challenging parents and saying, so how are you going to atone for the sins of abusing your, underprivileged? What the heck do they mean by that? We have our individual karmas, right? that's the story of Vatmiki. I don't want to go in there. So, but you have a responsibility to make sure your children don't need to know caste, but your children need to know what it is to be a Hindu. And that is very important. How Dharma works in Hinduism. Please join our Hindu parentsnetwork.org for that. Suresh Ji is one of the leads on hinduparentsnet.org. We are working to enlighten our parents and young people on Dharma. How they can stand up as proud Hindus in the United States. So I just want to say one last question. So what can we do to stop SB403? There's no guarantee we can stop SB403. As you heard Richa and Suresh talk about it, lawmakers can make bad laws. But you can do your best to reach out to your lawmakers and tell them what this SB403 is based on: false data and bad information, defining religion and people based on random thinking of hate groups. So there are lots of ways to do it. If you're not part of one of our WhatsApp groups, we have a lot of WhatsApp groups on fighting SB403, join it. Join Kona and get involved as a volunteer. Fight with us. We need everybody to join us, okay? So you can also send emails to Judiciary Committee members today. You can submit your own position letters. We have Kona position letter. You can take that template. We can provide information based on what Suresh talked about, a few of the legal issues and the violations of protections that are available to all Americans that are now going to be denied in SB403. We can provide all of them. So come back and ask us those questions. I'm going to continue a few more of these sessions with both of them. I want to set up a session during a work day and invite a judiciary, well, maybe the Judiciary Committee too, but the senators and their staffers. To get them to attend one of these things, you have to call it as a constituent and let them know we are doing these public sessions as educational. We want you to show up, because judiciary does not have to invite Carnegie to come and teach them about caste survey. They have no responsibility to do that. But you have a responsibility to call your elected official and say, I want you to show up at this event because this gives you the facts of SB403 and why it's a profiling and a violation of all of the rights available to everybody in America.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, when
it's
you're
about
talking
11:05. Yeah.
Sorry, one quick point. When people asked about how to talk about this to our friends, it's also important to know how to talk about this to lawmakers. The important thing to talk to is to keep it simple, keep it focused, and keep it on the facts. The simple, focused, factual message that we want everybody to take to their lawmakers and their senators and Congress people. By the way, don't forget your representatives in California either, because before this can become law, the House has to vote on it as well. It's not just the Senate. The House has to vote on it. The House has to have a matching resolution, matching law, and so on and so forth. The simple, straightforward message on this law is this. This is a law that seeks to profile a minority and criminalize them based on flawed, statistically invalid data. That's it. This is about profiling a minority using vague religious grounds and establishing a principle of guilty until proven innocent. So the profiling is what we are up against. We are happy to work with senators or anybody else who wants to truly investigate the prevalence of caste-based discrimination in the United States workforce. Let us do some research. Let's figure out who's really doing if there is discrimination, who's doing it, why are they doing it, how prevalent it is, so on and so forth, so we can make an informed decision. So the message to lawmakers is, A, we want to make an informed decision based on real data, not data that is flawed, not statistically significant, and whose methodology has been called into question by every reputable organization we have ever spoken to. And don't profile a micro minority without giving them a chance to talk to you. Don't make one-sided laws. Those are the two key messages that we should take to lawmakers.
Right. So there are other questions, but in the interest of time, I have to say we have addressed the broad questions on what can be done on SB403, how you should engage with organizations such as Kona, become a volunteer, become a Dharma warrior. We want more Dharma warriors. We had about 40 people on this call. In the WhatsApp groups, we have at least 400, 500 people. So not a lot of people are engaged in understanding and learning. But those of you who joined today, I thank you for it. Like I said, we are going to conduct more of these sessions. Next week, maybe I might bring Utsav Chakrabarti just as an education for us on who Equality Labs is. Because it's very important for us to know who Equality Labs is and how they get away with platforms in universities, in states and cities when nobody challenges them. And it's our problem that we haven't challenged them well. You cannot, file a lawsuit against them because it's their right to the First Amendment, right? You can't do that. So they are taking advantage of all of the tools of democracy to embark on attacking us. But we can be informed and educated and again, take our messages to where it counts, our elected officials. So with that, I'm going to conclude. I thank you for everybody to joining and both Suresh and Richa joining from India. Okay. Special thanks to both of you. Yeah. Thank you. And we'll talk again.
And people don't know the extent of the sacrifice I'm making. I've actually stopped watching the CSK Mumbai Indians match to join this.
Oh my gosh, that is huge.
So
thank you.
sacrifice.
And, thank you very much. And we'll convene again. We're going to have a series of conversations. So thank you for joining. Look out for our future announcements. And become a volunteer, sign up with Kona. Thank you. Good afternoon.